The clatter of a glass hitting the linoleum floor cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Every conversation paused. Forks froze midair and a hush spread across the room. The North Avenue diner was packed on a Saturday night. Neon lights flickering outside, while the smell of grilled burgers and coffee hung in the air. At the center of it all stood a young waitress, her left arm wrapped stiffly in a cast from shoulder to wrist. With only one hand, she tried to balance a tray that was far too heavy. Her face flushed crimson as the coffee mugs rolled and crashed. The manager snapped his head around, his voice sharp. "Lila, for the love of God, can you not handle a simple table of 4? His tone cut through the diner louder than the crash. Customers stared, some whispered. Lila bent quickly, clutching the tray with her good arm and gathering the shards with trembling fingers. Her lips pressed together in silent apology. She never once looked up. At a corner booth, a man watched quietly. He was dressed simply in jeans and a button-down, a jacket thrown carelessly over the seat beside him. His name tag read nothing. His face was just another stranger among many, but inside his chest, his heart clenched. Ethan Cross had seen employees stumble before. He had seen mistakes in kitchens, angry managers spill broken plates. But this was different. He could see the strain in her face, the stiffness of her cast, the stubborn determination that pushed her to keep working, even though every movement looked like pain. Ethan shifted in his seat, fighting the urge to intervene. He knew he could not reveal himself, yet not here, not like this. For now, he was just another customer sipping coffee, observing. Lila carried the tray again, her wrist trembling. Her shoulders squared, as though bracing against humiliation. The other servers exchanged looks, but no one helped. The manager crossed his arms, muttering something under his breath. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had grown up in diners just like this one. His mother had worn the same weary smile, had carried plates, long after her back had begun to ache. He remembered the quiet nights when she came home limping, whispering that everything was fine, even when it clearly was not. He had sworn to himself that one day, if he had power, he would never let someone like her go unseen. Now, in the buzzing neon light of a small-town diner, that promise came back with the force of a wound reopening. He stirred his coffee absently, eyes never leaving the waitress with the broken arm. She moved from table to table, apologizing gently, balancing mugs with a grace that did not belong to someone so exhausted. A child dropped a spoon, and she crouched to pick it up, nearly losing her balance, her casted arm hanging uselessly at her side. Still she smiled at the child and whispered, "You are fine, sweetheart." The parent gave her a distracted nod, already back to scrolling on their phone. Ethan felt his chest grow heavier. This was not about a broken mug or an angry manager. This was about survival. He watched her return to the counter, flex her fingers as though pain shot up through her shoulder, then pick up another tray without hesitation. Something in him shifted. He had come here undercover to check his business from the inside, to see the numbers behind the reports, to understand why one of his locations was struggling. But what he found that night was not in the spreadsheets or the profit margins. It was a girl with a broken arm who refused to give up. It was dignity in the middle of humiliation. It was strength wrapped in silence, and what he would uncover about her life would change him more than any balance sheet ever could. Lila Hayes was 23 years old, and on most nights she looked older than that. Her blonde hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, loose strands sticking to her temple from sweat. She wore the same faded uniform that every waitress did. a pale blue blouse and black apron stained with coffee rings and ketchup smears. What made her stand out was not her clothes or her face, but the cast that swallowed her left arm. She had broken it 2 weeks earlier when the brakes on her second-hand car failed on the way to work. The doctor told her she needed rest, at least 6 weeks with no heavy lifting. But rest was a luxury she could not afford. Rent was due, her mother's medication came with receipts that piled on the kitchen table, and her younger sister's tuition notice lay folded in her wallet as a constant reminder. So she showed up every morning and every night, hiding the pain behind a smile and convincing herself that one more shift would keep the lights on. She had learned to balance plates with her right arm, to pivot her body so the cast did not get in the way. Customers rarely noticed. Those who did offered pitying glances she politely ignored. What mattered was finishing the shift without collapsing. She had become an expert at enduring. Beneath the fluorescent lights of the diner, her laugh was soft and fleeting, a sound she shared mostly with children or elderly customers who reminded her of her mother. When Dennis, the manager, barked at her, she nodded quickly, never answering back. She had seen too many coworkers lose their jobs for talking back. She knew silence was safer. Silence kept bread on the table. Outside of work, her world was a cramped 2-room apartment at the edge of town. The wallpaper peeled in the corners, the floor creaked, but it was home. There, her mother rested on a worn sofa, heart medication bottles, lined neatly on the side table. Her sister Maria, 19, studied late into the night with a laptop so old the battery no longer held charge. Lila kept the place running. She cooked, cleaned, worked, and always returned with a grocery bag, even if it only contained bread and instant noodles. She had been mother and father since her real father walked out 10 years ago. Every time Maria looked up with tired eyes and whispered, "Thank you," Lila told herself the sacrifice was worth it. Ethan Cross, meanwhile, was a man everyone thought had it all. At 34, he was the CEO of Cross Dining Group, the company that owned over 100 diners scattered across the country. His face had appeared in magazines, his speeches quoted in business journals. People described him as ambitious, relentless, polished. What they did not know was that behind the tailored suits and the steady voice was a boy who had once sat at a corner booth of a diner, waiting for his mother to finish her shift. She had scrubbed counters until her hands cracked. When she complained about the unsafe conditions, her manager had smiled thinly and reduced her hours until she quit. Ethan was 14, then powerless and angry, vowing that one day he would never let another mother be treated that way. He worked his way up through night classes, business school, and relentless hours at entry-level jobs until he built his own empire. Now he was the head of a corporation, but success came with distance. Boardrooms filled with charts and polished reports did not tell him what really happened on the floor. Managers smoothed numbers, executives painted rosy pictures. Ethan had stopped trusting paperwork, so every year he went undercover. He dressed down, changed his name, and slipped quietly into his own restaurants. He bussed tables, scrubbed floors, or simply sat as a customer, watching with his own eyes. That was how he ended up in North Avenue Diner on that humid summer night, sipping coffee under the flicker of neon lights. He told himself he was there for research, to understand the employee culture. But as he watched the young waitress with the broken arm, something unsettled him. He recognized the determination in her face, the weight in her shoulders. It was the same weight his mother had carried, the same exhaustion he thought he had left behind when he rose to power. The diner became more than a business location that evening. It became a mirror. He studied Lila not as a CEO, but as a man remembering where he came from. Every stumble she made, every polite smile despite pain, every apology that should not have been necessary, pulled at something deep inside him. He wondered how many Lila worked in his diners, how many stories went unnoticed beneath the hum of cash registers. He had built his empire on the belief that hard work created opportunity. But looking at her, he realized hard work without protection only created suffering. Ethan shifted his coffee cup and leaned back, blending into the chatter of customers. On the surface, he was no one, but inside he was already making a promise he had not expected to make that night. He would find out who this woman was. He would understand why she worked with a broken arm, and he would not leave until he knew the truth. When the last customers left and the neon sign buzzed faintly against the dark, Lila lingered at the counter, wiping surfaces with her one good hand. Dennis muttered something about her staying behind to finish cleanup and disappeared into his office. By the time she hung up her apron and stepped into the humid night, the street was nearly empty. Ethan had left earlier, or so she thought. But in truth, he followed at a distance, curious, unable to silence the gnawing question of why she kept working when any doctor would have told her to stop. She crossed the street to an aging apartment complex where paint peeled from the walls and a single dim bulb flickered above the entrance. She pulled out a key, her movements slow with fatigue, and slipped inside. Ethan hesitated, but curiosity won, and he found himself standing across the street, staring at the narrow window on the ground floor. Through a gap in the torn blinds, he caught glimpses of her life. The living room was small, almost bare furnished, with a sagging couch, a foldable table, and a lamp that buzzed louder than it glowed. Lila entered carrying a grocery bag from the diner. She placed it carefully on the table and began unpacking it. 2 rolls of bread, a container of mashed potatoes, and a slice of pie wrapped in wax paper. She moved quietly, almost reverently, as though each item was precious. Moments later, a figure appeared from the hallway. An older woman, thin, gray-haired, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. Her face was pale, her steps unsteady. Lila's expression softened instantly. She guided her mother to the couch, adjusting the pillow behind her back, then opened the container of potatoes. Sitting on the floor beside her mother's knees, she began feeding her with the same gentleness she offered to children at the diner. Her voice was calm, almost melodic. "You are safe now, Mama. Eat a little," she whispered. The older woman did not speak much, only nodded faintly and accepted each spoonful. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched from the shadows. It was not pity he felt, but recognition, as though he had been here before, in another lifetime, watching his own mother return from work, too exhausted to eat. After her mother finished, Lila kissed her temple, covered her with a blanket, and walked down the hall. She opened another door to reveal a teenager hunched over a notebook on the floor, pencil scratching furiously. Maria, her younger sister, looked up with tired eyes. "Homework again?" Lila asked, sinking down beside her. "This math is impossible," Maria groaned. Lila laughed softly, took the pencil with her right hand, and pointed at the equations. She guided her sister through the problem patiently, explaining each step, her tone encouraging. When Maria finally solved it, Lila tousled her hair. "You are smarter than you think." Maria leaned against her shoulder and whispered, "I do not know what I would do without you." Lila smiled faintly, her eyes shadowed by weariness. Ethan stood frozen across the street, the cold glass of the lamppost against his hand. This was not just a waitress, this was a caretaker, a provider, a sister carrying responsibilities far too heavy for someone her age. The cast on her arm suddenly told a deeper story. She was not reckless or careless. She was someone forced to choose between healing her body and keeping her family alive. Later that night, Lila returned to the tiny kitchen. She tore the bread roll in half and sat alone at the table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. She ate slowly, stretching each bite, as though she had learned long ago how to make small things last. Before taking the last piece, she glanced toward her mother's room where a faint light glowed. "Do not worry, Mama," she whispered. "Today, I found bread no one else touched." Her lips curved into a smile meant to hide the ache in her chest. Ethan turned away, eyes burning. He had come to audit a restaurant to understand profit loss. Instead, he had stumbled into a lesson no spreadsheet could teach. He had seen strength wrapped in silence, love, expressed in patience, sacrifice, disguised as everyday routine. And for the first time in years, he felt powerless again. The image of her spoon feeding her mother, of her encouraging her sister, of her eating the smallest portion for herself, carved itself into his memory. He walked away slowly. Rain beginning to fall, the promise forming quietly inside him. Whatever was happening in that diner, whatever story lay behind the waitress with the broken arm, he would not leave until he uncovered it. The diner was busiest in the late afternoons, when workers from the nearby factory poured in for dinner specials. On those days, the clatter of plates and the sizzle from the grill never seemed to stop. Lila moved quickly from table to table, balancing trays with one arm. Her steps light despite the obvious discomfort. Some customers noticed the cast and frowned. Some whispered comments she pretended not to hear, and others simply treated her as invisible. The manager, Dennis, barked orders from the pass window like a drill sergeant, his voice cutting through the noise. He had little patience for mistakes and less compassion for weakness. To him, Lila's broken arm was an inconvenience he tolerated only because the diner was short-staffed. Every time she faltered, he reminded her that plenty of people were looking for jobs. The words clung to her like a threat. One evening, a group of teenagers crowded into a booth, loud and careless, snapping their fingers at her for refills. When she brought a tray of sodas, one boy smirked and nudged his friend. "Watch this," he whispered. As she leaned to set the cups down, he deliberately knocked one over. The sticky liquid spread across the table and onto her uniform. The boys erupted in laughter. Lila's cheeks burned, but she stayed calm, grabbing napkins with her good hand and cleaning the mess. "Sorry about that," she said softly, though she was not the one at fault. Dennis stormed over, glaring. "What is wrong with you, Lila? Do you not have enough coordination to handle drinks?" Lila opened her mouth but stopped. She had learned silence was safer. She cleaned quickly and moved on. Ethan sat 2 tables away, his jaw clenched. He wanted to say something to call out the boys, to remind Dennis who was truly at fault, but he forced himself to remain undercover. He scribbled notes on a napkin, each word pressing harder than the last. Another night, the diner fell into chaos when the fryer broke during the dinner rush. Orders piled high, the cooks shouted over one another, and Dennis searched for someone to blame. He found Lila. "You are slowing everyone down," he snapped. "If you cannot keep up, you should not be here." Lila kept scrubbing the counter, her face pale but steady. Ethan saw the tremor in her hand as she lifted another tray. She never argued, never defended herself. She simply endured. It was both infuriating and heartbreaking. She worked double shifts without complaint. He noticed she often arrived early and left last, wiping tables. No one else bothered with checking salt shakers, stacking napkins. On nights when the tips were poor, she quietly collected leftover bread from the kitchen, slipping it into her bag. Ethan watched the way she interacted with children, crouching to their level, smiling through exhaustion. He watched her calm, irate customers with patience, even when she was humiliated. Once a woman snapped, "This is not what I ordered. Can you even read?" Lila apologized quickly, took the plate back, and returned moments later with the correct order, bowing her head as if she deserved the scorn. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. The injustice weighed heavier with each shift he observed. The breaking point came one Friday when the diner overflowed with customers and the line stretched to the door. The kitchen was chaos, the grill sizzling non-stop, the dishwasher jamming. Lila tried to carry a heavy tray of plates with her, one good arm, her body twisting to keep balance. Halfway across the room, the tray tilted. Plates slid, one crashed to the floor with a sharp crack. Silence fell. Dennis's eyes narrowed like a predator, catching scent. Again he barked. "How many times are you going to screw up?" She stammered softly. "I am sorry, it was just—" "Save it," he cut in. "You are on your last chance, Lila. One more mistake and you are done here." The customers pretended to look away, but Ethan could feel their unease. He stood abruptly, almost revealing himself, but then felt the faintest tug on his sleeve. It was Lila. She had moved past him, whispering, "Please do not." Her eyes met his for a fleeting second. They were not pleading for pity. They were begging for survival. If she lost this job, her mother lost medicine, and her sister lost tuition. Ethan's throat tightened. He sank back into his seat, fury swirling behind his calm expression. After the rush, when the diner quieted, Lila slipped into the restroom. Ethan followed discreetly, pausing by the hallway. He heard the faint sound of running water. She stood at the sink, rinsing her cast as though the heat of the evening had seeped into her bones. Her shoulders trembled once, a silent sob quickly swallowed. Then she straightened, splashed her face, and returned to the floor, with the same faint smile as before. Ethan gripped the edge of the hallway, breath unsteady. He realized then that the strength she showed was not the absence of pain. It was the choice to carry it silently. That night, as the diner closed, Dennis tossed the keys into his pocket and muttered, "Lock up when you are done." Lila then left without another glance. Ethan lingered at his booth, pretending to finish his coffee. He watched her stack chairs one by one, wipe counters with aching movements, mop the floor with her right hand, guiding the heavy handle. It was past midnight when she finally slumped into a booth, too tired to move. She pulled a notebook from her apron pocket, flipping it open. Inside were Bill's notes about medication, Maria's tuition reminders. She stared at the numbers, pressing her forehead against her good hand. For a moment she looked so small, so breakable, that Ethan nearly crossed the room then and there. But he stopped himself. He could not yet reveal who he was, not until he understood everything. The sky was heavy with rain. On the night everything unraveled. Storm clouds pressed low against the diner's flickering neon sign, and the smell of wet asphalt drifted in each time the door swung open. Inside the place was packed again, factory workers, dripping rainwater onto the floor, truckers stomping in for hot meals, families demanding refills. The pressure in the kitchen was unbearable. Cooks shouting the fryer, hissing the printer, spitting out ticket after ticket. Lila moved faster than she should have, weaving through the chaos with a tray balanced on her good arm. She ignored the sharp ache pulsing through her shoulder, the dull throb that never left her broken arm. She told herself she could get through one more shift. She always told herself that. Dennis prowled the floor like a hawk waiting for mistakes. He snapped at a busboy, cursed at a cook, then turned his glare toward Lila. "You are falling behind again. Move faster." Lila bit her lip and nodded, rushing toward a table of 6. The tray wobbled as a child kicked the leg of her cast. She steadied it quickly, forcing a smile at the parents who barely noticed. Sweat dampened her collar, her good hand shaking as she set down the plates. Ethan sat at his corner booth, fists clenched under the table. He had watched her push past limits for days, but tonight he sensed something different. There was a fragility in her movements, the way her knees buckled slightly each time she turned. The way she pressed her lips tight to hold back a wince. He wanted to stand to stop this performance of endurance, but once again she caught his eye briefly, as if to say, "Do not interfere." She walked back toward the counter, reached for another tray piled with steaming dishes, and lifted it with visible strain. For a moment she balanced steps steady, then the room tilted. The heat from the kitchen mixed with the weight of exhaustion, and her vision blurred at the edges. She staggered once, tried to correct, but her legs gave out beneath her. The tray crashed, plates shattering in an explosion of sound. Customers gasped, a child screamed, forks clattered against plates. And there she was, lying on the slick tile floor. Her body limp, her chest rising shallowly. For a second, no one moved. Then Dennis's voice cut through, sharp and furious. "Damn it, Lila, you clumsy girl. You are costing me money." He started toward her, as though ready to drag her up by force. Ethan was out of his seat in an instant, heart hammering. He knelt beside her, ignoring the shards of porcelain around them, his hands steady as he checked her pulse. It was there but weak, her skin clammy, her lips pale. She weighed almost nothing when he lifted her, gently cradling her, as if she might break. The room fell silent. Customers watched with wide eyes, whispers rising like a tide. Dennis sputtered, "Sir, put her down. She can walk, she is fine." Ethan shot him a look that froze him in place, though no one understood why. Carrying her through the narrow hallway, he pushed open the breakroom door with his shoulder and laid her carefully on the worn vinyl couch. He grabbed a towel from the locker, dampened it under the faucet, and pressed it to her forehead. His heart pounded, not with panic, but with something deeper. A kind of fear that came when someone else's pain mattered more than his own. After a minute, her lashes fluttered, her brows furrowing as she struggled to focus. "Am I fired?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan froze, breath catching in his chest. Of all the things she could have asked, after collapsing from exhaustion, that was what she feared most. Not her health, not her broken arm, but the loss of a paycheck. He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "No, you are not fired." Relief flickered across her face, though tears glistened at the corners of her eyes. She turned her head slightly, murmuring again, "Do not tell my mom. Please, if she knows I collapsed, she will stop eating. She will not sleep. I cannot let her worry." Ethan's throat burned. He wanted to tell her she did not have to carry this weight alone, that someone else could help. But he held back. She tried to sit up, and he gently pressed her shoulder down. "Rest just for a moment," he whispered. She stared at him, then eyes shimmering with a mixture of fear, shame, and exhaustion, older than her years. He reached for her hand without thinking, wrapping his fingers around hers firmly. For the first time, she did not pull away. She let herself lean into the steadiness he offered. Outside, the storm lashed against the windows, thunder rolling across the sky, but inside that small break room, there was only silence. and the fragile rhythm of two people caught in a moment neither expected. Ethan realized then that this was not just an employee he had stumbled upon. This was a woman who had been fighting battles invisible to everyone around her, and he knew with painful clarity that he could not walk away. The following days blurred together in the rhythm of clattering dishes and murmured conversations. Yet something unspoken had shifted. Ethan still sat in his corner booth, pretending to be an ordinary customer, but now his gaze lingered on Lila with a new awareness. He noticed the way she disguised pain with small smiles, the way she favored her good arm yet never refused when someone asked for extra help. Each evening he found small ways to ease her burden without revealing himself. Once he quietly intercepted a tray she nearly dropped, pretending he was stretching as he steadied it back onto the counter. Another time he slipped an extra tip into the pocket of her apron when she was too distracted to notice. But it was not the money that mattered to him. It was the moments of closeness, the chance to stand beside her, even silently. One evening after the dinner rush thinned, Ethan saw her leaning against the counter, her shoulders sagging. He approached with a cup of soup he had ordered, but never touched. "You should eat something warm," he said softly. She blinked at him in surprise, then laughed faintly. "Customers are not supposed to take care of me," he shrugged. "Maybe I am not like most customers." She studied him for a moment as though weighing whether to argue, then accepted the cup. Her fingers brushed his when she took it, sending a subtle jolt through him he did not expect. She sipped slowly, her expression easing. "Thank you," she whispered, as though unaccustomed to kindness. After that night, small rituals began to form. Ethan would arrive just before her shift, always sitting in the same booth, always greeting her with a nod that carried more meaning than words. Lila found herself waiting for it, the quiet reassurance that at least one pair of eyes in the diner did not judge her. He asked gentle questions between orders. "How is your arm today?" She would shrug, saying it was manageable, though he could see the strain in her eyes. "Do you ever rest?" She would chuckle a dry sound. "Rest is for people who can afford it." Their conversations were brief, but they carried weight. They built a fragile bridge across the gulf of her silence. One stormy night, the lights flickered, plunging the diner into a dim glow of emergency lamps. Customers groaned, Dennis cursed, but Lila simply lit candles from the storage closet, placing them along the counter until the space glowed warmly. Ethan joined her carrying a lighter, and together they transformed the chaos into calm. They worked side by side, their shadows long against the walls, cleaning counters in the soft flicker of flame. It should have felt eerie, yet Ethan found peace. In the silence, the quiet scrape of sponge against metal, the rhythm of her presence. When their eyes met in the candlelight, he caught something tender in her gaze, a fleeting softness that made his breath catch. Later that night, she cut her palm on a shard of glass when the dishwasher jammed again. She tried to hide it, rinsing the wound quickly at the utility sink, but Ethan followed, and without a word, pulled a folded handkerchief from his pocket. A real one, not a napkin. He wrapped it gently around her hand, his fingers careful against her skin. She looked up at him, startled, her eyes shimmering. "You always carry that." "Old habit," he said with a small smile. She did not speak for a moment, just stared at the neat bandage, her lips parting as though she wanted to say more. Then she whispered, "I have had worse." "I can tell," he replied softly. Something fragile hung between them in that silence, a thread neither dared to pull too hard. Days turned into weeks. Ethan noticed that every night after closing, Lila stayed behind to scrub the floor long after others had gone home. One evening he lingered and offered to help. She laughed at first, saying customers do not mop floors, but when he insisted, she handed him a bucket. Side by side, they cleaned the diner in near silence. Occasionally their hands brushed, and each time her heart skipped, though she hid it beneath her tired smile. For Ethan, the mundane task became sacred. He had eaten in luxury restaurants, spoken at banquets, but nothing felt as grounding as standing barefoot on a damp diner floor beside a girl who scrubbed with cracked hands, yet carried herself with grace. He realized healing was not always about rest. Sometimes it was about being seen. And in those quiet moments, he made sure she felt seen. Another night near closing, she carried plates to the kitchen and stumbled slightly. He caught her elbow, steadying her. Their faces were close, breath mingling. She froze, startled, but did not pull away immediately. Instead, her lips curved into the faintest smile before she gently stepped back. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded, words caught in his throat. He was not supposed to feel this way. He was here to observe, to understand, to protect. But with every passing day, his resolve blurred. This was no longer about a report or a business strategy. This was about a woman whose resilience lit something inside him he thought had died long ago. He lay awake at night, replaying her laughter, the curve of her smile, the way she comforted her mother and sister with endless patience. Each memory deepened his conviction. He was not simply undercover anymore. He was entangled heart and soul. And though he had not said it aloud, he knew with certainty that she had begun to heal something in him too. The turning point came on a Saturday evening when the diner overflowed with customers, and the tension in the air felt sharp enough to cut. Tickets piled high on the line, Dennis barked at the cooks, and servers darted between tables. Lila moved swiftly, despite her arm balancing plates with practiced precision. Then a mix-up occurred. A couple at table 9 complained that they had ordered the chicken pot pie, but received the pork special. Dennis stormed out of the kitchen, holding the plate like evidence in a trial. Who made this damn mistake? His eyes scanned the room and landed on Lila as if pulled by instinct. "You again," he snapped. "Do you switch tickets on purpose just to ruin my night?" Lila froze, clutching a tray against her hip. "It was not me," she began, her voice small. Dennis cut her off. "Every single time it is you. You are a walking disaster. You think just because you smile politely, you can hide your incompetence. You are lucky I have not fired you already." Customers turned uncomfortably, some whispering, others looking away. Ethan, stacking trays near the counter, dropped one with a loud clatter. "It was not her," he said sharply, his voice ringing louder than he expected. "She has been on dishes since the shift began. I was on prep with Luis when the order was called." It was not her. Dennis's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, you have been here 5 minutes and think you know how this place works." Ethan felt his pulse racing, his jaw tight. Before he could speak again, he felt a tug at his sleeve. Lila stood beside him, her fingers wrapped around his wrist, her eyes pleading. "Do not," she whispered. "Please, it is okay." Her voice trembled, but carried a fierce determination. "If I make a fuss, if he fires me, there is no backup plan. No food stamps, no second job. If I get fired, my mom loses her medicine." Ethan's chest ached. The room spun with noise. Orders shouted, plates hitting burners, yet for a moment it all blurred. He saw only her eyes filled with quiet desperation. She let go of his wrist and turned back to the sink. Head bowed, Dennis smirked, muttered something about incompetence, and stormed back into the kitchen. Ethan stood, frozen fury burning under his skin. Hours later, when the rush ended and the diner emptied, Lila slipped into the break room. Ethan followed quietly, pausing at the door. She sat on the bench with her arms wrapped around herself, her head bowed. "I did not do it," she whispered when she sensed him there. "But I took the blame anyway." Again, Ethan stepped inside slowly. "Why?" he asked softly. She lifted her head, eyes shimmering. "Because if I fight back, I lose everything. Silence keeps me employed. Silence keeps my family fed." Her voice cracked. "But it does not get better. It just gets heavier." Tears spilled quietly down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking. Ethan sat beside her, close enough for her to feel his presence, but not so close as to overwhelm her. He reached out gently, resting a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it slightly enough to breathe for a moment, without holding it all in. They sat like that in silence until her sobs subsided. Something inside him broke wide open. He could no longer remain the nameless customer in the corner. The following morning, an announcement was made. All staff were to gather in the dining area at 9 sharp. Whispers spread, servers exchanging nervous glances. Dennis paced by the register, suspicious and irritable. Lila sat near the back, her cast resting in her lap, eyes tired but curious. Then the double doors swung open. Ethan entered, no longer in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, but in a dark suit and tie. His presence filled the room with quiet authority. He walked to the front, his expression steady, and turned to face them all. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Ethan Cross." Silence fell instantly. Some staff frowned, confused. Dennis blinked, then sneered. "And who exactly are you?" Ethan's gaze locked on him, calm but unyielding. "I am the CEO of Cross Dining Group. For the past several weeks, I have been here undercover." The words landed like thunder. Jaws dropped, whispers erupted, and Dennis's face drained of color. Ethan continued. "I did not come here to scare anyone. I came because I stopped trusting reports. Numbers can be polished, spreadsheets can be doctored, but the truth lives in everyday moments. In who cleans up after others, in who stays late without asking, in who works through pain without complaint." He clicked a remote, and the flat screen above the counter flickered to life. Footage from the security cameras played silently. Lila wiping counters long after others left. Lila bowing her head as Dennis shouted. Lila collapsing in the kitchen. Murmurs spread through the room. Dennis stammered, "This is out of context. Sometimes you need to test commitment. That is all." "No," a voice said softly from the back. Everyone turned. Lila had risen, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady. "You think because I am quiet, you can do whatever you want. You think silence is permission, but it is not." Her gaze swept the room. "We deserve respect. We deserve to work without fear. We deserve to live, not just survive." A few servers nodded, one wiped away tears. Even the dishwasher in the corner straightened. Ethan stepped forward, emotion thick in his throat. "She is right, and let me be clear, no one in this company should ever feel invisible." He turned to Dennis. "You are fired, effective immediately." Silence held for a beat, then a wave of relief rippled through the staff. Lila stared at Ethan, stunned. "So all this time you were watching me?" Ethan looked at her gently. "No," he said softly, "I was learning from you." His eyes locked with hers, unspoken truth lingering in the air. The diner never felt the same after that morning. Dennis's absence left a strange quiet, almost as though a storm had passed, and everyone was still learning how to breathe again. The staff moved cautiously, exchanging glances that carried both relief and uncertainty. Lila kept her head down, wiping counters with her usual diligence, but her chest felt heavy. She could still hear Ethan's words echoing in her mind. CEO. For weeks he had sat in her section asking small questions, carrying trays when he thought no one was looking, wrapping her hand when she cut it. She had thought he was just a kind stranger, maybe a factory worker, passing through, maybe someone who understood her struggles. Now she realized he had been watching all along. The revelation gnawed at her. Every memory replayed with a new layer of doubt. Was his kindness genuine, or was it pity from a man of power studying a struggling waitress? That evening, after her shift, she stepped outside into the cool night. Ethan was waiting near the entrance, no longer blending into the shadows but standing tall in his suit, unmistakable. Lila stiffened. "You should not be here," she murmured, brushing past him. Ethan followed his voice low. "Lila, please. Let me explain." She stopped at the corner, turning sharply. "Explain what? That you lied? That you let me believe you were someone else? While you sat there judging me?" He shook his head. "I was not judging, I was trying to understand." Her eyes burned. "Do you know how humiliating it is to realize every word I said to you, every weakness you saw, was just entertainment for the man who owns the place?" His chest tightened. "That is not why I was there. I came because I did not trust the reports. I needed to see with my own eyes what my employees go through. And what I saw was not weakness. What I saw was strength that humbled me." Lila shook her head, tears threatening. "You will never understand. You get to go home to penthouses and offices, while I come back to a mother who cannot breathe without medication and a sister who needs college tuition. You think a few kind words erase the distance between us. You live in a different world." Ethan stepped closer, his voice rough. "I grew up in your world. I watched my mother scrub counters until her hands bled. I watched her lose her job for speaking up. I swore to myself that if I ever had power, I would change it. That is why I am here. Not to pity you, not to play games, but because you reminded me of her. And because somewhere along the way, I realized I care about you more than I should." Her breath caught at his confession, but fear surged stronger than hope. "Do not," she whispered, backing away. "Do not say things you cannot mean. Love does not exist between people like us. You are a CEO. I am a waitress with a broken arm. People will laugh at me. They will say I am after your money." Ethan's eyes softened, filled with something raw. "Let them laugh. Let them whisper. I do not care about appearances. I care about you. The woman who works double shifts without complaint, who feeds her mother before herself, who stays up teaching her sister algebra. That is who I see. That is who I—" He stopped, breath shuddering. "That is who I am falling in love with." Silence stretched between them, heavy and trembling. Lila's heart pounded, torn between the longing she had buried and the walls she had built to survive. She wanted to believe him, to step into the warmth of his words, but the fear of disappointment clawed at her chest. "If you mean it," she whispered finally, "then prove it. Do not just speak. Show me that I am more than a case study, more than a story you can fix." Ethan reached out gently, but she stepped back, shaking her head, then turned and walked away into the night. He let her go, his hand falling to his side, his chest aching with the weight of her mistrust. Over the next days, they moved like strangers again. Lila served his table with polite professionalism, no longer meeting his eyes. Ethan respected her distance, but every time he watched her move through the diner with quiet resilience, his resolve deepened. He began implementing changes across the company. Quietly at first, adjusting schedules to prevent exploitative double shifts, increasing wages, providing health benefits that included family coverage. But none of it mattered to him if Lila did not believe in his sincerity. One night after closing, he walked to her apartment, hesitant but determined. Through the window, he saw her sitting at the table, her casted arm resting across a pile of bills, her good hand rubbing her temple. Her mother dozed on the couch. Maria scribbled notes at the foldable desk. Ethan knocked gently. Lila opened the door, surprise flashing across her face before it hardened. "What are you doing here?" He held up an envelope. "This is not charity. It is a scholarship program for employees, for their families. Maria qualifies." Lila blinked, speechless, glancing at her sister's wide eyes. "And your mother," he continued softly. "We have partnerships with medical centers. She can receive care, real care." Lila's throat tightened. "Why? Why would you do this for us?" Ethan's voice softened, trembling with truth. "Because you showed me what courage looks like. Because I am tired of building an empire on the backs of invisible people. And because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I fell in love with you." She stared at him, heart-racing emotions colliding in a storm. For the first time, she saw not a CEO, but a man standing in the rain outside her fragile home. His eyes raw, his words unguarded. Part of her wanted to slam the door to protect the life she had built from disappointment. Another part of her wanted to step into his arms and let herself believe. Maria's hopeful gaze, her mother's soft breathing in the background, the weight of years of sacrifice pressed down on her. She whispered, "I do not know if I can trust this." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it, day by day, however long it takes." He did not push further. He simply placed the envelope on the table, nodded once, and left into the rain. Lila stood frozen at the door, her chest aching with something she could not yet name. The night of the love confession came quietly, without fanfare, without warning, like a truth that could no longer be hidden. It was late, the diner already closed, the neon sign humming faintly against the drizzle outside. Lila had stayed behind as always, her good hand pushing a mop across the slick floor, her casted arm hanging stiff at her side. Ethan lingered in the shadows near the counter, torn between leaving her space and refusing to walk away again. He stepped forward finally, his voice low. "You should not be doing this alone." She startled, turning sharply, eyes flashing with both exhaustion and guardedness. "I have been doing it alone for years," she said quietly. He walked closer, his steps echoing softly against the tiles. "And yet you still stand. That strength is what brought me back here tonight." She looked away, her lips trembling. "You do not understand. I cannot afford to believe in words. Words have never paid rent, never bought medicine, never kept the lights on." Ethan's voice broke slightly. "I know. I grew up with the same shadows. I watched my mother work herself sick in a diner like this. I know the cost. That is why I swore to build something different, and that is why I cannot walk away from you." Lila's eyes lifted to his, searching for deception, for pity, for anything that would prove him just another man, with promises too heavy to hold. Instead, she found something raw, unguarded. "Why me?" she whispered. "Out of all the people you could choose, why the waitress with a broken arm?" He stepped closer until only the counter separated them. "Because when I look at you, I see more than a waitress. I see a daughter who feeds her mother before herself, a sister who sacrifices her future for another's education, a woman who refuses to bend even when the world tries to break her. And somewhere in the middle of watching you fight, silently every day, I realized my heart was no longer my own. It belongs to you." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of years of her mistrust and months of his restraint. Lila shook her head slowly, tears burning her eyes. You say that now, but what about tomorrow? When people whisper, when they say I am not good enough for you, when they look at me and see only my uniform and this cast. He reached across the counter, his fingers brushing hers. Let them whisper, I will stand beside you. Let them laugh, I will hold you tighter. None of them know the truth of who you are, but I do. And I would spend the rest of my life proving to you that love is not about class or wealth or status. It is about finding the one person who makes surviving worth it. Her breath hitched her walls, cracking under the weight of his sincerity. She had spent so long carrying burdens alone, convincing herself love was a luxury she could never afford. Yet here was this man, not offering to erase her struggle, but to share it. She lowered her gaze, tears slipping free. I am so scared, she admitted. Scared that if I let myself hope, it will all disappear. He moved around the counter, slowly stopping only when he stood directly in front of her. His hands hovered at her arms, waiting, never forcing. Then he whispered, Let me carry the fear with you. Let me be the place you fall when it is too heavy. She looked up at him, her heart pounding so loudly she thought he might hear it. For the first time, she saw not a soul in a tailored suit, but a man stripped of armor, trembling with the same vulnerability she felt. The dam inside her finally gave way. She stepped forward, resting her forehead against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. Ethan exhaled a shuddering breath and wrapped his arms around her, gently careful of her cast, holding her as though she was something precious and unbreakable. The world outside faded. There was only the sound of rain against the windows and the rhythm of their breathing sinking together. I do not know how to do this, she whispered against his chest. Neither do I, he admitted, his voice rough. But I know I want to learn with you. She tilted her face upward, her eyes shimmering with fear and hope interwoven. His gaze met hers, and the distance between them dissolved. Their lips met in a kiss that was not rushed, not desperate but steady and reverent, a seal on a promise neither of them fully understood yet. Both needed. It tasted of salt and rain and unspoken vows. When they pulled apart, Lila's cheeks were wet, but her eyes glowed with a softness Ethan had never seen before. He pressed his forehead to hers. You are not invisible to me. You never were. She closed her eyes, whispering, Then do not disappear. He tightened his arms around her, anchoring them both. In that fragile moment, in the quiet of an empty diner, two people from different worlds discovered that love was not about what you owned, but about who you chose to see, and who chose to see you in return. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow turning of seasons, quiet but unmistakable. Ethan did not vanish after that night in the diner. When he confessed what had been locked inside his chest for weeks, he stayed not as a distant CEO, but as a man who returned each evening to sit in her section, to listen, to quietly share the weight she carried. At first, Lila struggled with disbelief. She braced for the day he would disappear, the moment she would wake, from what felt like an impossible dream. Yet each time she looked up, he was still there, steady and patient, asking about her mother, slipping Maria new notebooks for her classes, reminding Lila to eat before the end of a shift. His presence began to stitch something inside her that had long been torn. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, like light slipping slowly through the cracks of a shuttered window. The first piece came when Ethan arranged for her mother to be admitted to a proper medical center through a new employee care initiative. Lila had resisted at first, pride stiff in her voice, but the night she saw her mother sleeping peacefully under the quiet watch of nurse's color returning faintly to her cheeks. She cried into Ethan's chest until there were no tears left. The second piece came when Maria received an acceptance letter for a scholarship funded by the company's new education program. For the first time in years, Maria's laughter filled their apartment without restraint. She hugged Lila fiercely, whispering, "You gave me this chance." Lila shook her head and looked at Ethan across the room, realizing he had kept his word. Yet the largest piece of healing was not in programs or scholarships or hospitals. It was in the way Ethan looked at her when she returned from long shifts. The way he held her hand without hesitation, the way he never tried to erase her struggles, but simply stood beside her through them. Their relationship grew quietly without spectacle. They shared late-night walks when the streets were nearly empty. Coffee cups warming their hands, their conversations drifting from childhood memories to unspoken fears. Ethan admitted how lonely success had become. How often he questioned whether he had built a life worth living if no one truly knew him. Lila admitted her exhaustion, the fear that one wrong step could shatter everything she worked for, the shame she felt whenever pity lingered in someone's eyes. Together they discovered that love was not about grand gestures, but about being seen in the unguarded moments. Ethan's board of directors raised eyebrows when he announced sweeping reforms. Minimum wages in all diners were raised. Mandatory health coverage was expanded, double shifts were capped. He stood at the head of a polished conference table, his voice steady, and when someone challenged the cost, he replied simply, "We do not profit off broken bodies. The strongest systems are built on dignity." What none of them knew was that every policy bore Lila's fingerprints, every change shaped by her lived experience. In the evenings, she met with him to review drafts, her cast resting on the table as she scribbled notes. She spoke not as a waitress, but as an advocate, her voice gaining strength each time he reminded her that she mattered. It was during one of those late nights, papers scattered across his office desk, that Ethan reached for her hand and kissed the scar on her palm, whispering, "You have changed me." She smiled softly, her eyes luminous. "Maybe we are changing each other." Months passed and autumn settled over the city. Leaves turned gold and crimson, drifting across sidewalks. Lila's cast was removed at last, her arm thin but healing. She flexed her fingers, laughing with relief, and Ethan caught her hand, raising it to his lips, as though it were something sacred. Together they visited her mother in the care center on Sundays. Maria often joined, telling animated stories about college classes. The three of them would walk through the garden, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. Lila sometimes paused, watching Ethan push her mother's wheelchair, with gentle patience and her chest filled with a warmth she had never dared to imagine for herself. Yet healing also meant facing fears. One evening, as they strolled near the river, Lila admitted in a trembling voice, "I keep waiting for the world to take this away, for someone to say, 'I do not belong in your life.'" Ethan stopped beneath a lamppost, the light haloing her face. He took both her hands in his. "Belonging is not something the world gives us, Lila. It is something we choose. And I choose you, always." Her tears fell freely, then not of sorrow but of release. She kissed him there on the riverbank, a promise carved into the night air. Their love was not a fairy tale untouched by struggle. It was forged in exhaustion, in sacrifice, in wounds both visible and hidden. But precisely because of that, it carried a depth that endured. 6 months later, the diner looked different. The atmosphere was lighter. Laughter replaced the constant dread. New staff felt welcomed. Old staff stood taller. A framed photo hung near the register, showing the entire team smiling, Ethan and Lila at the center. Customers noticed the change, though most never knew the story behind it. For Lila, the diner was no longer just a place of survival, but a symbol of resilience. A place where she had been seen and where she had found unexpected love. On the evening of her mother's birthday, Ethan surprised her with a small gathering in the care center's garden. Strings of lights glowed softly. Maria brought cupcakes, and her mother, though frail, smiled more vividly than she had in years. When Lila leaned down to hug her, her mother whispered, "You look happy, my girl." Lila's throat tightened. "I am Mama, more than I thought possible." Across the garden, Ethan watched them, his eyes misted, realizing that healing was never just about one person. It rippled outward, touching everyone connected. Later that night, as they walked home hand in hand, rain began to fall lightly. Lila laughed, tilting her face to the sky. Ethan pulled her close, his jacket shielding her, but she shook her head. "Let it fall. It feels like a blessing." He kissed her then in the rain, a kiss that carried gratitude, longing, and the quiet certainty of a future shared. In that moment, he knew with absolute clarity that the greatest discovery he had ever made as a CEO had nothing to do with profits or expansion. It was the discovery of a love that healed wounds deeper than any he had acknowledged, a love beyond class, beyond circumstance, a love that saw and was seen. And Lila, once the waitress with a broken arm, now stood as a woman no longer invisible. Her heart open, her life transformed. Together they had chosen to live, not just to survive, to heal. Not just to endure and to love without fear of what the world might say.